It must have been a difficult decision to call that evening's reciprocator meeting, Tunks thought as she apparated with Nick into the living room of 12, Grimwald Place. She had been in the office unloading some files to Bertie Worgs about the latest rounds, something she didn't have to do, but had decided to do following Christmas, and had kept it up. He had accepted the last week's batch, completed with not as much care as they once had been, Tunks noticed, for the shifts they had been assigned for the members they had were far greater than they had been 6 months ago. They were there, though, and that was the important thing. She had said as much to Bertie, who had accepted them, and thoughts of a warm bed after her long night out, she had made to go when he had explained that Cleus was seriously ill in St. Mungo's and Mick Mullen had been called out of bed and had reluctantly made his way into the ministry just after 2 a.m. to act in his stead. It wasn't until Tunks had awoken at nearly 4 that afternoon when the gravity of the situation had sunk in and she immediately flew to her cousin to fill her in. Sirius had explained that Cleus had self-administered an experimental potion that was for Remus and that he had collapsed in the hospital wing. He was now in the bed adjacent his brother. For how long? What's going to happen to him? No one knows. The healers are going to watch and see. What a moron. But Tunks did not agree. She could only imagine what Cleus felt, having been behind the half-breed legislation, and his desire to reverse the effects of the vampire bite on his brother must have been overwhelming. And she knew that Sirius knew that too. Nothing Cleus did was without planning and foresight. However, feeling seemed to be shared with others as they arrived, just after 8 in 2s and 3s. James was already there and the pressure seemed to be telling. He was no longer the sprightly Era of 6 months ago who was entertaining the reciprocators arriving back from shifts with jokes and laughter. Now, more somber greetings were had, for more somber news was ever being imparted. Molly Weasley had gone into the kitchen and prepared food for them all, which was a good distraction from the meeting ahead, and had soon been joined by Petunia Black, who arrived close to 8:30 in the company of Anne Blewett. All 3 women were furnishing the living room table with food. The quantity before them implied a long night ahead. Already the 2 women NWRs had made name for themselves within the reciprocators. The group themselves met and coordinated patrols around the country, at first helping injured non-wizards, and progressing on to prevention of confrontations, Petunia Black's skill in empathy placing her in a unique and valuable position. It was harder for them to meet physically as often as the reciprocators did, as they could not flew, but by means of non-wizard communication, the email, telephone, letter, they established a peacekeeping presence, and de-escalating tensions were having a great effect. Tonight, before the start of the meeting, both witches, although Petunia Black disliked being labeled as such, swore an oath of secrecy to whatever information was imparted, and James had conducted the secrecy spell. All knowledge and surrounding intelligence would be forgotten if either one were to break the oath. In effect, it made them more auxiliary reciprocators, something which Sirius loathed, especially in Anne Blewett's case, for it was her husband, Thales, who had kept the half-breeds that he and Remus had visited on that fateful day. Remus, of course, was still in hospital, his brother Cleus being the latest drama in the whole sorry mess. As for Sirius, there were days he thought he would never get out of bed. It had been 6 months ago, and now, even with the modified Wolfsbane potion, which Snape had adapted for him, even after a spurt of good health around Christmas time, he had barely had enough strength to leave the house. The room grew increasingly silent as James took the floor, leading with the purpose of the meeting itself. The reciprocators, Anne, and Petunia, dropped still in the speculation over the Minister for Magic's condition ceased. He looks ill, Tunks thought as she looked at his lined, haggard face. It wasn't just the face of the reciprocators, constant fatigue and weariness. This was something more, born of betrayal, and the effort of going on despite it. He stood before them, swayed a little, then steadied himself, and cleared his throat. As well as Cleus's condition, which was of the greatest significance, other matters, shift patterns, attacks, and the forthcoming hearing in Strasbourg on the Declaration of Wizards. In the minutes, taken by Benjamin Worgs, apologies were noted, namely Severus Snape, Cleus Lupin, Mick Mullen, Minerva McGonagall and Lily Potter. There were mumbles to this. Lily, having not been seen since Christmas at any meeting, was not a surprise, and Minerva at Hedgewood's was understandable. But, of course, it was the absence of the others, Snape, Callias and Mick, who the rest were keen on knowing, for they were integral in that night's meeting. "I will begin with the easiest of these, namely the shifts," James began, a hand to his temple as he fought to think. "Though our coverage of the country has increased, and the incidents we have dealt with have been successful, our presence is stretched. That said," he glanced around at the faces, dogged determination etched in all of them despite their exhaustion, Moody, Bath, Bradley and Dave Mullen having only been off an 8-hour shift for less than 2 hours. "If we did not do this, I can only imagine the hostility and enmity between wizards and non-wizards in the country. We are doing well. Had I been able to speak to Cleus about the proceedings in the ministry, with respect to the forthcoming hearing in Strasbourg, I could have given you the bigger picture. As it is, I will ask Mick, who is currently at the non-wizarding ministry, with the Prime Minister, having had a meeting with the combined government this morning, to represent the ministry's position at another time." Murmurs passed to and fro between the wizards and non-wizards, words such as potion, Saint Mungo's and even Remus could be heard. "May I say something?" Through the effervescence of the meeting's members Sirius raised a hand. James nodded, not smiling however, Tunks noticed. In view of the opportunity that Remus can be restored to full health, he darted a look to Anne Blewett. "I would like to say here and now, on record, that I feel Cleus Lupin's actions show a high degree of bravery and commitment, as well as downright foolishness. I wonder whether I would do that for my brother? I hope that I would." At this, he nodded to Petunia, who nodded back, an unknown communication happening right in front of them, Tunks noticed. "Do you think," began Nick, but Tunks shushed him quickly. "Then, I would like to welcome Petunia Black and Anne Blewett, representing the non-wizard reciprocators, the organization which carries out the opposite job to us. They patrol the streets, neutralizing potential conflict between wizards and non-wizards, offer empathy, offer understanding. While the conjurists are bent on causing the maximum amount of hostility and antagonism towards our non-wizard neighbors, the NWRs do an almost invisible job of repairing this." He looked across to Petunia. With difficulty, Tunks thought. Lily, despite not being the bodily, was there in her relation to those present. James Potter was showing a great deal of courage and professionalism chairing the meeting. What was he thinking? Hissed Bathsheba, her long, black hair glinting in the candlelight. "I don't think he was," said Tunks. "I mean, it is a lot for one person to take on. Hold on, SHHH. She looked back to James, who had asked Arthur Weasley to note down the times and frequencies of attack. "There has been an increase," he concluded, as Petunia sat back down, "in occurrence and severity. More and more people are being injured severely by attacks from wizards. Now, they do not know the difference between wizards and conjurists, and so, of course, they are beginning to become defensive when any wizard approaches them, in case they put a spell on either themselves or, if they are with their families, their children." "It must be terrifying," half-whispered Molly, her voice downcast. A few others nodded in agreement, including Anne Blewett. "Not knowing if you are going to be hurt by a wizard or which who may otherwise be just stopping to ask for the time, or directions. So a lot of non-wizards aren't taking any chances. Public places, on the street, for example, shops, offices, government buildings, libraries, leisure centers. They are starting to ask wizards to leave their wands behind, or secure them in a locker. Which means conjurists are seeing just what it was they have always imagined they saw. Hostility to themselves by non-wizards," Petunia continued, her voice low, as if trying to control an inner anger, "and so, feel threatened. Hence the declaration of wizards. So," continued James, determined not to dwell on his sister-in-law's hostility to what she believed wizards to be, proud and arrogant, and turned instead to Dave, who had his hand raised. "In the meantime, what does the head of the reciprocators?" He turned his head a little and added, in a faux whisper, for comic effect, "that means you, James Potter, believe we should do?" "Carry on," said James, smiling. I know that Harry has been preparing the Ministry of Magic's perspective, and Hermione too, for Draco Malfoy and the European Wizarding Union. But there have been killings all over Europe, Mad-Eye Moody. Irritably, killings all over Europe have been reported, and not as subtle as here, with feigned confrontations over football matches and disagreements in the street, real murders. The torture curse. And those who survive live in agony with damaged nerves, so-called accidental deaths, being run over, falling off very high things, such as mountains. Electrocutions from electrical devices which were otherwise found to be safe. He looked around, outrage in his eye. Of which none are being addressed at all, despite all summoned through Out of the Wise, that same book that was declared safe for wizards and non-wizards. At this, the room began to talk again. It was true. They knew about the murders. Pensives and the Prophet reported them daily, including non-wizards going missing on holiday, or in lonely places, very few being solved to any degree of satisfaction. Tonks saw Petunia Black and Dan Blewett look at one another. It was clear they were not surprised to hear that. "Then I propose that the reciprocator's position is that the veil is destroyed," shouted someone from the back. Tonks turned and was shocked to see Bill Weasley, his hand raised. As a curse-breaker for Gringotts, that he was calling for its destruction showed how strongly he felt about its power. But then, since his wife's untimely, tragic death in Cairo as a result of an artifact he had discovered in a tomb in Karnak, she could understand his feelings. "We should just destroy the veil," echoed Sirius. "What about Tabitha?" "It's causing a lot of people to be injured, to die, just because of its very presence," snapped back Bill, hotly. "It is clear to anyone not blinded by policies and paperwork, that is, that Albus Dumbledore and Gellert Grindelwald are somehow accessing the memories behind the veil to do damage in our world." Bill was shaking, angry at something, and his mother crossed the carpet and put a hand on each shoulder. He fell silent. "No, I cannot believe this to be correct," said James, looking gravely amongst the reciprocators. "I have sent word to the Department of Mysteries, to Gregor, for advice, if that will put your mind at rest, Bill," he added. The eldest Weasley's son shuddered, but said nothing. "You are correct. The memories do change, they will change. Part of Tabitha's mission was to use this physical effect. It may be that part of what she is doing is causing this." James nodded as he confirmed this, his head feeling undoubtedly dizzy as the evening went on. He badly needed sleep, and was unlikely to get one for a good, long time. "But it does not change the Art of the Wise and the Conjurist's access to it," said Benjamin Waggs, doubtfully, nodding at Bill, who was red-faced with emotion, trying desperately to make sure it did not show. Callias tried to have it banned and he was overruled. "What if what you say is correct, James?" Benjamin nodded his blonde head towards their leader. "But what if she's being used? What if she's beyond the veil and she's being used by Dumbledore and Grindelwald? Isn't she supposed to be back by now?" James hesitated. There was more he knew than he could tell them. But he had to calm their fears. "If we call for this, and we are wrong, and the veil is destroyed, not only will we be condemning Tabitha Penright to death, but we may undo everything Aberforth ever did to defeat the scourge which was Dumbledore's army. He lived and breathed the defeat of wizard extremism, not only towards non-wizards but to wizards too, moderate wizards, who just want to live in peace. If the veil is destroyed, Aberforth's meticulously planned strike at the heart of his brother's plan of domination of the world will be taken away, and Miss Penright's life, too. I am afraid I cannot vote for that." "That's if she's not dead already," muttered Bill, but with less heart in the assertion than before. "What haven't you told us?" asked a voice from James's right. The head of the reciprocators turned a little. Sirius," said James. "It's the first we have heard of the nature of Tabitha Penright's objective, descending into the veil nearly 12 years ago. Are you going to tell us about the nature of the non-transmutable objects too?" Tonks looked at her cousin. There was no mirth or triumph in what he said. In fact, he looked more serious and grave than she had seen him in a long time. James was about to respond when he caught the eye of the Weasley twins, craning over to listen, one with their hand raised. "Yes, Fred? George?" James nodded in acknowledgement. Eh? Sorry? The twins exchanged glances. Fred began again. We've not heard about any of this before, he clarified. We don't know what you are talking about. James looked at them blankly for a moment, before touching his head, then shaking it. Oh, that's right. You have only recently been inducted. He glanced at his sister-in-law and Anne Blewett, who also had not heard this before. It would not do any harm, they were sworn to the reciprocators. He cleared his throat, which was growing hoarse. Tunks shifted in her seat. Nick caught her hand from her lap. For the benefit of our more recent members and exits from the NWRs, James nodded, we should make a few things clear. You are aware that an artifact called the Veil exists, in the Department of Mysteries. Both the twins nodded. Petunia and Anne did not. It is believed, but no one can be certain, that it is a store of memories, long past memories and recent ones originating from pensives. Tabitha Penwright, a reciprocator, was tasked with going beyond the veil in a mission arranged with my predecessor's predecessor, Aberforth Dumbledore. On the day she descended beyond, a person returned back, Cecilia Lupin. Fred and George both raised their eyebrows. It was not new to Petunia Black, but Anne Blewett's face was one of shock. We have reason to believe that Albus Dumbledore and Gellert Grindelwald wish to access beyond, and they have, or are in the process of obtaining the non-transmutable objects needed. One is a letter, which Cecilia had in her possession, which led her to here, 12, Grimmauld Place. The second, we believe, is a locket, belonging, once, to Tabitha Penwright. A third, for as we know, these are used in threes, is as yet unknown. So, you believe Cecilia is the third NTO. Petunia folded her arms, her eyes fixed on James. We cannot speculate. Also, we cannot ignore that it is a possibility considering how much of a coincidence her disappearance has been, with no trace. Alternatively, she could be dead. I do not think she is dead, Petunia said, quieter, this time. She stood up and took the floor. I was in contact with her close to Christmas. I have been a friend of Cecilia's ever since the night 4 years ago, and there. She flicked a glance to Sirius. She was driven away. Recently, she was happy, delighted to be coming home. And then she did not. But she did leave Durmstrang. She is no longer there, added Bertie Bradle. I was asked by Clears to trace the ship's passage and there was no sign of her. She was no longer at Durmstrang. She never did board that ship, although someone did. Who? Asked Petunia. Another employee of Durmstrang, replied Bertie. Clears had it in hand. He is now the headmaster at Hedgewoods. Lindveld Halen? Asked Sirius, stepping out of the shadow of the hall doorway. He arrived here on the night Cecilia disappeared, from Durmstrang. Indeed, agreed Bertie, his moustache waving as he spoke. He was due to come anyway and Clears saw it provident that he could be appointed head in the absence of Severus Snape. Provident, echoed Sirius scornfully. As if anything Clears does is by accident. We are moving from the point, said Arthur Weasley, suddenly. Cecilia is missing. 3 NTOs possibly exist and only 2 are known to exist, although I know that 3 are needed to go, according to tradition, so we are assuming 3. To go? Asked Fred, who felt it was about time he asked the questions that he and George needed answering. Where? The room fell silent, each waiting for another to provide an answer. Beyond, said James, eventually. At certain times access beyond, to the world of souls can take a person anywhere they want, and anywhen, any place and time. Many wizards have tried, and failed, to master the veil either with the precise thinking of a logician or, in a less organized fashion. I have considered. James broke off, sighing. He wasn't ready for this. But events were ready. I have information to share from Clears at the appropriate moment. He raised a hand. 1 or 2 more hands joined him. Tunks raised her own and Nick followed her. It was unanimous. Just carrying on, and an uncertainty in the ministry was concerning, so it was a shrewd move on James's part to remind them of a few things. "We know already about those," said Benjamin Wergs, as he nodded to Sirius. As an error, it was his department who had been responsible for examining them. Aberforth was clear on these. One of them was stolen from Callias's office. Cecilia's letter, Tabitha Penwright's locket, went missing. No one knows about the third. That's if what is being planned by the locket isn't. Tabitha's interrupted someone quietly from behind Arthur Weasley. Let us be clear on that. And let it be clear that the third is now in the hands of him. Him? Asked Arthur Weasley. Grindelwald, clarified Mad Eye. He has lived so long, and with help. Oh, I don't mean Albus Dumbledore. He had a chance of eliminating Grindelwald in 1945. I mean the help that only a powerful agent to promote life would be able to give him. Callias and Aberforth both assured us that the Philosopher's Stone was out of their reach. Dave Mullen interjected. And if he did have it, why continue to go to all this trouble to seek something else? He wants something powerful, something dangerous from beyond the veil. You are right, James. Unless we know what that is, we cannot destroy our only access to the memories beyond. Tunks looked across to Bill, whose face was white with silent fury. What, though? Asked Sirius. Can you suggest what, James? Cecilia wrote about it. Tunks looked around, her mauve hair flicking this way and that as the eyes of the reciprocators, Wizarding and Non, were on her. It was then that she realized she had spoken. But that was just a book, a silly book, Nymphadora, Mad Eye chided, ignoring Tunks's look of indignation. Aberforth Dumbledore encouraged that foolishness? There was silence for a moment before someone spoke. It was Callias. Or rather, Callias's image, from a cloud erupting from James Potter's wand. It was clear that, at some point, the topic would come up for discussion. Alternatively, it was true and he didn't wish her to forget any detail that time might cause to be distorted. Misrepresented over time. I sent her to Durmstrang for our own safety. I believed her to be a danger, or a danger to us all. Was it just her, Tunks thought, who thought it was surreal seeing the Minister for Magic, knowing he was unwell in St. Mungo's, trying to save the life of his brother, was calmly talking to them all at their meeting. Under the sanction of the council, may I add, Callias's image continued to the silent audience. She began to note down her thoughts. I visited her and she relinquished it. But by then, it was too late. Too late for Henrietta, too, for she betrayed us all. There was silence at this. Henrietta Edwards, their closest ally, the unfailing reciprocator, working as hard as any of them, working brilliantly in Strasbourg, accolades of bravery and intellect to her name. But, she had been named after the trial in November as a potential conjurist. There was a cough. Sirius cleared his throat. It must be hard for him, Tunks thought. They had gone out with one another for so long. She knew him better than any of their friends. You believe she is the third intransmutable object, don't you? Shouted Bill, to Callias's image. Callias paused, as if hearing Bill Weasley, and continued. Aberforth encouraged it, not I. I believe her to be dangerous. But I cannot speculate further. Or won't, whispered Petunia Black, exchanging another look with Anne Blewett. Albus Dumbledore and Gellert Grindelwald know a little of the nature beyond the veil and have created alternative link to memories in Room of Artifacts. And you think Tabitha Penwright is a traitor, that she's behind the veil ready to help them? I can't believe that. This time, it was Molly Weasley shaking her head. I won't believe it, declared Mad Eye Moody. Not Tabitha. The mass of memories behind the veil is growing. It will become critical, unless there is a balance somehow, Dave Mullen explained. Some of that coming back to our world would redress that balance. How? Didn't Aberforth establish that the space behind the veil is infinite? Yes, but there is not room for two realities to exist at any one time. Cecilia's presence represents a dichotomy, for she exists here as well as the reality from which she originated. From the little I understand, there will be conflict if two opposing realities exist. We know of Cecilia Lupin's alternate reality to ours, facts such as poor old Tom Riddle, once a ministry employee here, actually became a greatly feared, evil wizard there. It would appear that if those memories meet or leak and realities blur together, that there is a very real possibility that the world that Mrs. Lupin wrote about a decade ago will break through and clash with our own. Unless this can be stopped. This is what I understand Aberforth's plan to be, through Cecilia's book, which told in intricate detail of her life in the other reality. Tabitha is to stop a clash from happening. He looked across to James, who nodded his black head briefly. Miss Penright was supposed to have contained the realities and sealed the veil? Asked Mad-Eye. Shouldn't she have done it by now? Aberforth never gave a time scale, said James. But, that she's not with us means today means that she is either dead or she is still behind the veil. Personally I believe the latter. And what would the result of these two realities meeting, what would it be like? Asked Benjamin Wuggs. His confidence far lower than it had been at the start of the evening. Tunks saw him wipe his forehead, as he stuttered his words. This time, Callias answered, though he couldn't have, for he was just a memory stored in James's wand. Like a great big gaping hole in the middle of London where all manner of things could come out. Or go in. Other limitations may not be popular but necessary. So what are the reciprocators doing about it? Bill addressed James now, not Callias, who seemed to have paused out of instinct, as if he were actually there, involved in the conversation. As always, replied James, to bridge the differences between wizards and non-wizards. It is even more critical now considering the critical relationship between us, which has been heightened and is more sensitive. We require our usual diplomacy in the carrying out of our duties. It's better that than the doing nothing, which will only cause more harm, agreed Petunia, nodding. James nodded back. Harm has already been done, Callias interrupted from his position above the members. Conjurists believe that the universal link does not exist, despite substantial scientific evidence to the contrary. Our way of life resting on it. It's in our DNA, he added, chuckling at his rather lame joke. This caused a few laughs too, and broke the tension. James waved his wand in tiny circles clockwise and Callias's memory disappeared. So, he concluded, we are all up to speed. All of us know the nature of the attacks, that's our primary concern, and the secondary being the threat from Dumbledore and Grindelwald. From tonight's suggestions, I need to propose the following: the proposition that the veil is destroyed and the proposition that we continue as we are, bearing in mind the information we have received about the nature of the reality beyond. He looked around the room. Rodolphus Lestrange raised a hand. Yes, Rod. Is there not a third? Asked the and part-time owl breeder. That, at the forthcoming hearing we make our position known? That we represent wizards who believe in the integration and cohabitation of wizards and non-wizards? Yeah. Yeah. Agreed many of those assembled, although there seemed to be a disagreement with Bill and his younger twin brothers about something nearer the back. James raised his hand. On that point, I believe the ministry will cover this. I know Harry has accessed information to that effect. But it would not be seemly to preempt what is to be decided, whatever our feelings. The hearing is asking for a declaration of wizardliness, a formal statement in law of our existence and our rights. This is, potentially, historic, for no declaration has ever been drawn up for non-wizards in a similar context. We would only distract from what is being said, and may cause bias one way or another. So, he concluded, looking round at the wizards before him, we have two questions. To the first, the policy of seeking the veil to be destroyed. Please raise your hands. Tunks looked around, pushing her arm to her side, determinedly. One or two hands, including that of Bill Weasley. Sirius, after a long pause, also raised a hand. Not carried, said James, looking over to Arthur, who was guiding a Minutes Maker quill over the parchment. Second, to continuing our duties as before. He looked at his sister-in-law. The NWRs are of my jurisdiction, added James, but I include our relationship with your organization in our continuation, he added. Petunia nodded. At this, all hands in the room raised. James smiled. Clearly, thought Tunks, he must have been worried that a change was tantamount to a vote of no confidence in his leadership. In that case, we had better get to it, hadn't we? 88,888,888. So you see, the action of your accent, your wand and the way you move it causes the spell to perform slightly differently, which is why practice with your own wand will perfect it for you. There is not one way that is suitable for any one wizard. One of your houses, Slytherin, its founder discovered this. Linville finished, as he looked at the first-year students, arrayed as they were in an arc of desks and tables in the headmaster's classroom. "The evil one?" asked Scarlet Adams, her face turning slightly towards the Slytherin boy who had been making her and her friend's life difficult of late, sneering at Algernon Pratt. Algernon sneered back. "Evil is a matter of opinion," replied Lyd, carefully. "Salazar was brilliant on this discovery, and I never had a crossword with him." A moment passed, before Rufus looked up from the set textbook on the grammar of spells. "With Slytherin? But he lived over 1,000 years ago. And you can't be any older than." He looked at their headmaster carefully. 30. There was laughter, nervous at first, as the students watched Linville Halen to see how he would react. "SHH!" hissed Julian and Daron, the latter poking him in the ribs. But Lyd chuckled a little. "A turn of phrase. I read his books often." "What, the books that the European wizards don't want you to learn?" asked Algernon, lazily. "Those which the ministry promised the combined government should be kept away from students?" "Indeed, Mr. Pratt," replied Linville. "I recall the directive distinctly. No defensive spells, no dark arts, no spells which could cause a danger. But, the world is becoming dangerous, and not teaching you to defend yourselves and others would be like never teaching you to read and write because one day you might use it for evil. I know of a place where terrible things did happen and the wizards, witches and mug non-wizards were much better off by being educated correctly. So, I am doing what I was employed to do, educate you." Gordy Springs, the Mulborn wizard who was friends with Roe Williams and Arella, raised a hand. "In Albus Dumbledore's time, sir?" "Yes," nodded Linville, "in Albus Dumbledore's time. But not how you mean. A mighty wizard, a terrible wizard arose, murdering, killing, torturing, a reign of terror forcing wizards to do the most dreadful things to one another." "Like conjucists?" asked Scarlet, a scowl again to Algernon, who shrugged it off. "Not quite. This wizard wanted more than anything else for eternal life, and any life was expendable." "We know this," whispered Julian to Darren, suddenly. "Septimus said that his mum wrote a book about it, a long time ago, a bit lame really, I read some. It was about this. Conjurists believe they are superior to non-wizards," Lyd continued to explain. "But a lot are uneducated, a lot simply do not understand and they are scared that wizards, Albus Dumbledore, Gellert Grindelwald amongst others may deem their lives expendable for the greater good they believe in. But this is not true. These wizards only serve themselves and see people, magical or not, as things, objects to be used and discarded at will. When you turn people into things in your mind, then to you, they are expendable. We all fight against this, we all should. Conjurists are ... misguided." The class was now silent. Should a pin decide to drop its sound, on meeting the hard, flagstone floor, would most easily be heard and would break the silence. Lyd smiled, which did just as good a job in the silence-breaking department. "So, we are continuing with our defense, and we are learning ... What does it say on the door?" "Practical defense," the children all chorused, getting to their feet. "Right," Linville nodded. "Wands in rest position." He put his right arm to his side with his wand pointing straight down to the floor. The young wizards followed. Right, nodded Lyd. "All right, inquiry positon." With him, all of them put their wands vertically upwards to the vaulted ceiling. Dual position. Lyd held his wand out at an angle 45 degrees, point away the tip. Right, he encouraged. When all of the children had their wands in the dueling position, Linville stood in the center of them. "We will begin as I was taught, a long time ago." He glanced at Rufus, who smiled back, with the 4 basic spells. "The first spell, Expelliarmus. Wands at rest, yes. Inquiry, yes. Dueling, yes. Now at the suits of armor. He pointed with his other hand to the range of armor arranged across the back wall of the classroom. Expelliarmus. Expelliarmus. Colored light shot from the wands. Expelliarmus. Expelliarmus. The children moved with the force of the spell, each time learning to adjust their body position, their wand movement in their wrists, their voice intonation. You can learn it too, Mr. Scott, said Lindveld, taking his wrist. Hold your hand thus, thus, thus. He moved Julian's arm in the 3 positions he had just taught them. Nothing happens, sir, said Julian, a little crestfallen. You are valuable, Mr. Scott, rebuked Lindveld. You are a non-wizard who has the insight into wizard training. And I understand you manages to levitate a leaf last term. Julian nodded slowly. Environmental magic. Your body adapted. Another nod. And you were ill. Yes, sir. Last term, sir. An unfortunate side effect. Here, try. Lindveld handed Julian a school wand. Hedgewood's equivalent of borrowing the lost property PE kit. 1. Rest. 2. Inquiry. 3. Duel. Lindveld spoke the instructions as more armor clanged and clashed to the floor. Julian raised their wand forward, the point outstretched. An armor's shield rattled and then fell off. A lot of laughter accompanied his effort, most of it friendly, and then a round of applause, begun, it would seem, by Arella. Julian lowered his borrowed wand. Thank you, he said, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. You were all very good, too. Right, nodded Lindveld, taking charge of the lesson once more. On to our next spell, rendering your enemies still. Immobilis. Immobilis, echoed the class, beginning to position their wands in the rest position. This is cool, said Julian, as the headmaster called for the children to practice in pairs. Right, Rocky, nodded Darren. They looked at Rufus, who was inspecting the suit of armor he had adequately managed to disarm. He had his ear to the breastplate. Do you think he wants to get out to the Greenwas tonight? Asked Julian, hand folding round his borrowed wand. It's just. He pulled Darren closer, unhooking the friend finder on his chain. Septimus's segment was glowing a very bright white. It's just, I have an idea, he hissed, looking furtively about. Neither had practiced the Immobilis spell yet, and the class were beginning to collect back together at the chairs. What? Tell you later. I need you and Newf. It's important, it's all 3 of us. Now, time for prep, all of you. You are to come into the classroom between now and next week to practice on the suits of armor and on each other. Lid put his wand inside his robe and, turning to the board, began to rub it off. Oh, he added, almost as an afterthought, and turned back to the children. A lot of them groaned quietly, as they guessed what was coming. I also want a half a page of instructions on what you were taught today. Dismissed. As they filed out of the headmaster's defense classroom, Lindveld approached Rufus, who was between Julian and Darren, looking over his shoulder at the armor again. Tomorrow is a busy day, your mum is coming to develop the quibble, Rufus Lestrange. Rufus nodded, vaguely. I think Rufus wants her to see his experiments, said Julian, who, since the discovery that the iron aluminium silicon oxide rock influenced the plant's communication, had been immediately enthused. Rufus nodded again. He had been training Doriel to detect radio signals, which influence his plants. But, what use is it, Nif? Julian had asked. That I can do it, it doesn't have to have a purpose, I've just found out that it's possible, Nif had replied. A lot of their conversations were like that, and it was that, or spend time getting depressed over missing Septimus. I cannot see that will be a problem, smiled Lindveld. I am pleased that she has agreed to come. He watched, as the children scampered off into the corridor towards their common room, then sighed. There was ever such a lot to do before the sports minister arrived. Meet with Constantin at St. Mungo's, for one thing. 88,888,888. Tabitha sees Raymond Lully and a woman with white blonde hair. She is sitting in a low-pitched roofed cottage, pine-walled and set above the rocky, wild landscape on sturdy, timber blocks. It is sunny. Tiny yellow and pink flowers are daring to show their heads above soil, chancing that it is going to get warmer. On the basalt coast waves dance and tumble. He has traveled far to see her. Aloysius looks at his friend, collaborator and co-conspirator, seizing the book from inside his harassed tweed robe. "I know you're here," called Raymond, his foot treading over the threshold of the open door, ducking under the beam almost double, his swarthy features and black hair almost lost in the interior of the home. This is where it all went wrong, Tabitha told herself, trying to deduce a date from a handful of visual clues from the landscape and the cottage, and was failing badly. This is the moment. It must be ... after the time he had made the Philosopher's Stone, she concluded, justifying it to herself that Peronel's line had now integrated with the native Icelandic population. Once you've made something, you cannot hide it, and deconstruct it. It cannot unhappen and be uninvented. And you cannot control whose hands the information falls into. And yet, she thought silently, in the direction of Aloysius, your great-grandson has something of yours. It will become important to him, in the correct moment. "Agneta," called Aloysius, following the Spanish priest and mystic into the tiny cottage. "Agneta? Where are you?" "You are expecting us," added Raymond Lully, taking off his hat. "We are here now, to meet you." The correct moment for whom? Tabitha thought, as she watched the darkness change shape. Very slowly, as if part of the darkness a woman, tall, slender, once perhaps beautiful, emerged. She had the trademark blonde hair of the truth-teller, and the pale, grey eyes. She looked both Lully and Aloysius up and down. Aloysius reached to his neck and closed his hand over something hidden under his shirt. "Which is more than can be said for my grandchildren. My daughters and granddaughters, doomed as they will be, not with imprisonment in this icy world," she said, looking between them again. "But, come in, please. My mother told me all about you. And, of course, I know what you want." Politely, they sat, on chairs made out of what seemed like heavily weathered driftwood. In the grate the flames licked around their fuel hungrily. With this foresight, they will be tormented by this curse, and they cannot run away. In the near blackness, chosen to offer as little light sensitivity as possible to her in the company of her visitor, the truth-teller which cradled her almost turned stomach. "But I cannot rightly say who will have a worse life, Aloysius, my line ... yours ... for, as you know, the future is set, but the value of those choices is in the judgment of those living at the time, what they make of them, and how they perceive them. You cannot shield your descendants from the pains of the world any more than you can control the natural forces on this planet. Ha! And many a foolish wizard has come to an end trying to overcome nature's own magic. We are merely a part of it, a cog in the machine. Aloysius, you would understand that." Agneta turned her elegant head, her chin dipping slightly over her soft, linen dress. From out of the neck she took out a gem, all held together with an intricate series of ties and knots. Inside its tangled prison a red gem sparkled in the spring morning sunlight. Agneta held out her watchstone. Tabitha took it. Neither wizard turns, but clearly, at some level, they must know she was there. And then, Aloysius looked right at Tabitha, as she put it over her neck, Agneta's hand, still outstretched, closing over the air. It was his place that she was in, his form she had seen so often. Was this tangle of threads going to come out straight, like a trick knot? She had heard of string theory, perhaps this jumble was it. In the past she never had it, and when she reascends through the cloud memories, and back to the ministry, it would not be in her possession again, either. And now, to madness, concluded Agneta, her hands resting on her stomach. Then her voice turned sharp and demanding. "Go. Now. You have what you came for," she shrieked, stabbing her whole arm towards the cottage's door. "And as for you, Raymond Lully," she declared, staring at him with cool, grey eyes. Both wizards did not flinch, but it was clear that they weren't about to argue. "I will tell you only this, choose carefully your position, for I believe you to be a wise wizard, Raymond Lully. One is not always solid, and is not always one. Take him. I will no longer be able to care for him. Begone. She shrieked, shambling off towards the corner that she had come with no backwards look. From the nest near the door a tiny ice phoenix, newly hatched from a crumbling ice crystal, clucked and pecked around its home. It would eventually finish its journey, Tabitha continued, via herself, Aberforth Dumbledore, and to both subsequent headmasters. But its journey did not begin there, it began here, with Aloysius. Ironic, really. She watched the aforementioned wizard scoop up the tray on which the unique bird rested. It chirruped at him inquisitively, before breathing a patch of frost onto his beard. Aloysius reached into his robe, and looked down at the time turner. Like the phoenix, it was unique. And, despite Salazar Slytherin's doubts on the timepiece's functionality, had not only got it to work, but to work accurately. Tabitha looked back to the half-hidden form of the Naruto Veritium. Agnetha was nursing her already close-to-term stomach. And now to madness. Tabitha lingered in the cottage after Lolly and Aloysius left, synchronizing their neckpieces as they stood on the tiny pebbled beach in the near summer sun. But not just yet. Agnetha would give birth to a girl, of course, and the watchstone she had made from the necklace Tabitha now wore would protect her until the girl was given it for her own. It would be then, and only then, that Agatha Nellis' daughter would lose her mind. 88,888,888. Lyd looked at Remus as Cleus slept once more. It had been a success. The stabilizing potion, one which would contain the parasite, would be suitable for Remus. But, of course, it may have taken the strength out of Cleus, for it had a silver derivative within it. Cleus had known this, of course, and still had done it. Lyd shook his head and smiled. So familiar to him, both of them? He remembered the memories he had awoken when he had seen into Celia's mind. She had been in the Helvellyn cottage. But there were also infinite other realities. Cecilia being employed at Hogwarts as Mole Studies teacher, and had met Remus Lupin at the time Sirius Black had escaped, a time where Remus had never deserted her at Christmas. Somewhere else he had not been executed. That was an important somewhere. But here was where he, Lyd, had to be, and here the boy had broken the girl's heart, even though she hadn't known it. He had the bag safely, Cecilia Lupin's, and thought about the kiss. Somewhere else she had been Mole Studies teacher and had met the man, to whom Lyd knew like his own family, at a different wizarding school, both with a secret, both finding one another before another great battle. It was no wonder she felt conflicted, considering all her mind and body had gone through. He touched his own neck, the chain within it ridged under his fingers, out of habit, the object which hung on the chain like a talisman. Lose that and all would be lost. All was going to plan. The only problem is that the animals that I have tested this on, Constantin continued, still about his work, examining Remus's body, half die of organ failure. While it may cure vampirism vector, there is a 50% chance that he may die in any case. A little whimper came from the corner of the darkened hospital ward. Lyd swung his wand around, the tip illuminating Lily Potter's face. She looked awful. Her hair was limp and lifeless around her pallid complexion, large purple smudges under her eyes. "And you are?" asked Constantin, who had yet to meet her, and continued to examine Remus. "His lover," answered Lily, boldly, eyeing Linville defiantly. Constantin merely nodded. "There is no going back if my sister'd. You have kin status?" It was unclear to whom he was asking this question. Lily closed her mouth and shrunk back into her chair. Linville considered the question carefully. "If no one has kin status, then I cannot," but he did not have a chance to finish as he was interrupted by a voice further beyond in the ward. "I do," a cracked voice declared. In the background a figure shuffled up in their bed. It was Cleus. He tried to put his feet onto the cold, flagstone floor, as if intending to cross over to them, tried bearing his weight, then sank back onto the bed, panting. A candle lit itself next to Cleus's bed. Lily shrank further back into her chair, then, suddenly, got to her feet. "No, Lily," breathed Cleus, as a nurse healer attended his bedside, bringing with him water. "You are clearly the reason my brother was so happy. Stay. He then looked crossly at the nurse, who was trying to examine him with her wand. Lie still, Mr. Lupin, the nurse healer chided. This won't take long. Lyd crossed over and sat in the chair next to Callias. I am going to work this day, said Callias, ignoring the frown of protest on the nurse healer's face. It was wrong of you to do this, Callias, said Lyd, for the country needs you. My brother needs me, as well you know. Lindvildhalen, Callias smiled as he emphasized the headmaster's name. He glanced across to Lily Potter again. She has been here a great deal, she saw what you did, Callias Lupin. Lyd told him. And then, next to the Hedgewood's headmaster Lily Potter stood. I regret the way things have turned out, she said solemnly, looking between him and Remus. I did not wish to see Cecilia gone. But, you and Aberforth gave him no choice but to marry her all those years ago. He told me. It brought us closer. He was unhappy. We were going to tell her, but then, Sirius, Lily broke off, awkwardly. It's the past, said Callias, refusing to look at Lindveld. There is nothing we can do about that now. We need to consider the future, this immediate future. But he could feel Lyd's eyes on him, at his words, and leaned towards him. Tell Constantin, said Callias, his voice tired and ragged again with the effort of speech. Tell him ... to give it to my brother. 88,888,888. Do you regret receiving the reciprocator knowledge? Sirius said, the reciprocator meeting long since over. The clock, edging its hands towards 3 o'clock in the morning, made its presence known, its mechanism quietly working away. He glanced in its direction before passing the whiskey to his old friend. It eased his symptoms, Sirius had told James. James's reason for drinking was all too apparent. No, I do not. And you accept the need for what we intend to do? At all costs we must prevent Hedgewood's reverting to the time of Albus Dumbledore, James replied. While I don't necessarily agree that non-wizards should attend, I have always thought it was brave and bold of Cleus to do this. True understanding born of collaboration, not division. James looked at his friend's face, its contours highlighted by the street lamps. Aberforth, he qualified. Strasbourg thought that way too, once. Our wizards were being forced to collaborate. And now the portable pensives and fireplaces are being monitored. Perhaps it was good that you never went there yourself. Sirius raised his glass, bitterly. That will be my straight-laced brother's department, he spat, in the direction of the depleted fireplace. Has Harry been to speak to you? James nodded. He knows all that I know. And all that Lily knew. Much good it will do them, at Strasbourg. Why did you do it, Sirius?